So last week we covered shlokas 35 to 40. Just a quick recap of the 5 shlokas that we covered last week. It is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though faultily, than another's duties perfectly. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duties, for to follow another's path is dangerous. Arjuna said, O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of lust. Thus, the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. The senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. That brings us to today's shloka. Shloka 41 of chapter 3. Tasmat tvamindriyanyadau
Tasmat tvamindriyanyadau
niyamya bharatarshapha
Niyamya bharatarshapha
papmanam prajahihyenam
Apmanam prajahinam
jnana vijnana nashanam
Jnana-vijnana-nashanam
tasmat tvamindriyanyadau
Tasmat-vindriyanadau
niyamya bharatarshapha
Niyamya bharatarshapha
papmanam prajahihyenam
Apmanam prajahinam
jnana vijnana nashanam
Jnana-vijnana-nashanam
tasmat tvamindriyanyadau
Tasmat-vindriyanadau
niyamya bharatarshapha
Niyamya bharatarshapha
papmanam prajahihyenam
Apmanam prajahinam
jnana vijnana nashanam.
Jnana-vijnana-nashanam
Word for word meaning and translation by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Tasmat, therefore, Tvam, you, Indriyani, senses, Adau, in the beginning, Niyamya, by regulating, Bharatarshabha, O chief amongst the descendants of Bharata, Papmanam, Papmanam, the great symbol of sin, Prajahi, curb, he, certainly, Enam, this, Jnana,
Jnana.
of knowledge,
Of knowledge.
vijnana,
Vijnana.
and scientific knowledge of the pure soul,
Scientific knowledge of the pure soul.
nashanam,
Nashanam.
the destroyer.
The destroyer.
Translation. Therefore, O Arjuna, best of the Bharatas,
Best of the Bharatas.
in the very beginning,
In the very beginning.
curb this great symbol of sin,
Curb the great symbol of sin.
lust,
Lust.
by regulating the senses,
By regulating the senses.
and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization.
Slay this knowledge of destroyer of knowledge and self-realization.
So, I had mentioned last week that any time that the Lord identifies a problem, he also immediately follows it up with a solution. And here's the solution. The Lord is asking Arjuna, because the question from Arjuna is, what propels us or compels us to do things that we really don't want to do, that causes us to commit sins? The Lord is saying, we need to curb our lust. How do you curb the lust? By regulating the senses. This lust is going to destroy your knowledge and self-realization. Lust will take you in the opposite direction of Krishna. So if we want to destroy this particular lust, which is our eternal enemy, we need to regulate our senses. In chapter 2, Krishna has already spoken about rasopya asyam, which is how we have to develop a higher taste. What is that higher taste?
Engaging our senses into Lord's
Krishna consciousness, yes. So the Lord has already told in chapter 2 that we have to use our senses to give them alternate medicine. The alternate medicine is to introduce different tastes to our senses. That different taste is spirituality. That different taste is Krishna consciousness. So how does one regulate our senses? By associating with devotees, by chanting, by reading Shastra, and by doing deity worship and changing one's diet to only honor prasadam, Krishna prasadam. So Krishna is once again repeating how one can regulate one's senses. So he says the only option for all of us to regulate the senses is not to run into the forest and try to control our mind, is to simply introduce things where the lust is sitting. The lust is sitting in our body, in the senses, in the mind, and the intelligence. So which means we have to regulate our senses, our mind, and our intelligence. How do you regulate one's senses? You regulate one's senses by tasting prasadam, by smelling the flowers that has been offered to Lord Krishna, that have been placed at the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, by hearing Sankirtan, by touching other devotees. This is the way we regulate our bodily senses. How do we regulate the mind? We regulate the mind by chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. How do we regulate the intelligence? We regulate the intelligence by reading Shastra, Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's a very simple formula because this lust is hiding in three places: the senses, the mind, and intelligence, which means all three places must be fumigated to rid of all of this ignorance. And the fumigation process is the ABCD formula: association of devotees, reading books, chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, doing kirtan, deity worship, and changing one's diet. So this is the Lord's advice to Arjuna in response to Arjuna's question. Yes, you asked me a question about why we are forced to do things. And now Krishna has answered that question. Simply put, we must regulate our senses, and senses sometimes includes the mind and intelligence in terms of reference. So all three areas where this enemy is hiding, we should find the hiding place and get rid of the enemies. But this is not a violent act. Whatever we do here is actually going to benefit us.